Welcome to the Tabliner video guide. In this video, we will discuss what Tabliner is and see how to start collecting data by creating a template to collect data of key performance indicators from several departments of the company. At the same time, we will look at the main features of the application. So, what is it? Tabliner is a cloud-based application for collecting data in the form of spreadsheets. The features of this application are wide opportunities for searching and eliminating errors, as well as flexible settings for accessing data. So, let's get started. After registering, we are taken to a screen in the app with a list of templates that we have created or been given access to. Let's create a new data template. First, let's go to the template settings and set a name for the template. We can also write a description of the template. Next, you need to select the data collection mode. Currently, there are two modes: collect data and collect and change. The difference between these modes is whether users will be able to modify already collected data. In collect data mode, users will not be able to make changes to previously collected data. This is necessary in tasks, where it is important to track any changes in already collected data, as this may lead to discrepancies in already built analytics or forecasts. In this mode, only the administrator and moderators of the template can make changes to the already collected data. In collect and change mode, there is no such restriction, and users can edit previously sent data. This mode is suitable for most tasks when control over already saved data is not so important, or for tasks in which it is necessary to constantly update the data. In our task, we don't care whether users can edit old data or not, so we'll select Collect and Change. Next, let's move on to Access Settings. It should be clarified that there are 4 levels of access to the template: Administrator, Moderator, User and Guest. In short, the administrator can change the template settings, and he is not subject to any restrictions on access to data. Moderators cannot change the template settings and are not subject to any data access restrictions. Then there are users. They cannot change the template settings. They are subject to all data collection, mode restrictions as well as other access settings. Guest. This is the access level where the user cannot enter new data into the template and can only see the data that all users can see. If you want to learn more about them, I recommend reading about them in the documentation on our website. So, let's go back to the access settings and add an access link. This link will allow people to access the template as a user or guest. You can also add users' email addresses to the users list field yourself. These users will automatically see your template in the users list on the first page. Next is a group of settings responsible for access to data for users or guests. These settings will not work for moderators or template administrator. Let's leave the parameter access to authorized users only enabled for our task. If it is disabled, the visitor will be able to enter the access link without authorization, having access as a guest. The users see all collected data setting affects whether users will see data that has been collected from other users. By default, it is disabled, and the user will only see the rows of data that they have added themselves or where they have been personally added by an administrator or template moderator via the users with access column. Let's leave it disabled for now. The users can edit any data setting is available only in collect and change mode. It allows users to edit any previously collected data, even that added by another user. Let's leave it disabled so that users can edit only what they have added themselves. The users can download data from archived column setting gives users access to export collected data from deleted columns. That is, if an administrator has collected data and then deleted some columns in the template, the data from those columns will be hidden. This setting allows users to download these hidden data when exporting. With limit the number of rows per user, you can limit the number of new rows that users can add. By default, it is not limited, so we'll leave it that way in our example. Next, we can add moderators to the template. You can add them right now by entering their emails. Then moderators will be able to enter your template now and see its settings. They will not be able to send data because data collection is not open yet. In our example, we will first customize the entire template and then add the moderators. Don't forget to save all changes using the button below, otherwise they won't be applied. Now let's move on to customizing the format of the collected data, setting up columns and limits. Let's create 4 columns. The first column with the name of the departments. Let's call it Department. Let's leave the data type as text. This parameter affects what kind of data can be entered into this column and what limits on values can be configured. The text data type accepts any value, treating everything as text. There are a total of 4 types of data now. You can read more about each data type in the documentation. Let's leave this column required for input. That is, it will not be possible to create a row with no value in this column. The lock parameter will be left disabled. This parameter blocks users from changing values in this column if enabled. That is, the user will not be able to change values in this column if a new row is created or an old row is modified. Limits will not be touched for now. These are settings of limits on column values. We will customize them after adding all the columns. You can add a description to make it clearer what the column is responsible for. The second column will be with the type of KPI of this department. Let's just call it KPI, and let's keep the rest of the parameters the same. The next column will be the KPI value. Let's set the data type to number, since the KPI will be numbers but not necessarily integers, so integer is not suitable. The rest of the parameters are the same. And the fourth column will be the date the indicator was calculated. Let's just call it date. The data type will be date. Leave the rest of the parameters as default and add a description. Now save all the changes we've made. Now let's add column limits. We'll start with the first column. Here we can add a list of departments existing in our company so that users can select only one of them and avoid spelling mistakes. For this, we need to create a new variant. A variant is a group of limits on the column values that must be fulfilled at the same time. In this case, the limits would be that only one of the company's department list values can be entered. So we will use the one-of-list limit. For columns with the data type text, we can also apply the none-of-list limit. This limit is needed if we don't want to be able to enter values from the list. We will need it later on. Let's add departments to this list. In our example, the company has 6 departments. You can add them separately or insert them here in one line where the values will be separated by semicolons. Apply the changes. Here we will save changes again. This is necessary to save the changes to the column limits. Let's see what these limits on the department column gave us. Add a new row for the example and look at the cell in the department column. As you can see, the one of values limit has appeared here. We can view this limit and select an available value. If this value will be different, not from this list, it will not match the limit and we will get an error. As long as there are errors in the row, the application will not allow us to save it. So before we start entering data, let's first add limits for the other columns as well. Now the KPI column, add limits here so that each department has its own list of available KPI. Let's start with the sales department. This department will have 4 types of available KPIs. These are revenue, customer satisfaction, conversion rate and customer churn. Now these limits are not related to the sales department. So let's add this relation using if. Select the column we need on which the values depend. In this case, it is the department column in which the names of departments are set. We will also select the one of list limit, but in this case there will only be one value in the list, that is sales. Now we have limits that it is possible to enter one of the 4 values in the KPI column if the value in the department column is sales. With other values in the department column, these limits will not work. Let's add limits for the other departments. The second will be the marketing department, which will also have 4 available values. These are click-through rate, website traffic, customer churn rate, and social media engagement. Now I will do the same with the rest of the departments in an accelerated mode. So all the limits have been added. Now each department has its own possible values that can be entered into the KPI column. Apply the changes and move on to setting limits for the KPI value column. Because this column has the number data type, it has more options for limiting values. For example, we can make it so that only numbers greater than or equal to 0 can be entered in this column. In our task, the part of the KPI is measured in percentages from 0 to 100. Let's add corresponding limits for them, and for the other types add that they must be greater than or equal to 0. For this, choose the From To, enter values 0 and 100. Add a relation to the values of the KPI column using if. Here we'll select one of list again, and we will add those KPI types that are measured from 0 to 100. In our case, there are 6 such values: conversion rate, click-through rate, security compliance score, and others. Now let's add a second variant for the other values where there will be a limit more or equal to 0. Now the second variant works for all values, even those specified in the first variant, since the variants work with each other according to the principle that the value must match one or the other variant. For fixing this, it is necessary to add a relation to the KPI column in the second variant, where the values from the first variant are excluded. This can be done using the None of List limit, adding all values from the first variant. Now the second variant of limits will be triggered for all values except those specified in the first variant. Apply changes, and let's move on to setting limits for the date column. Let's add the limit that only values from 2023 onwards can be entered. For this we will use the more or equal limit again. Apply changes and save changes again so that all limit settings are saved. So we are done setting up the columns and their limits. Now we can exit it. Before we start collecting data, let's add a user and a moderator for an example. After adding the user and moderator, we need to save the changes so that they get access. Now let's start collecting data and see what's changed, and then we'll enter data from different access levels. As you can see, after starting data collection, the administrator can still edit all template settings except the data collection mode. For changing the data collection mode, the administrator must first stop the data collection, then all settings will be available again. Also, and changing column settings and their limits is not available when data collection is running, but you can still view all the defined limits and settings. Let's add a few rows and see how all the given settings work. We'll start with the marketing department. Let's see what limits now apply to the KPL column in this row. That's right, only these 4 values are available to us. Also below we can see that this dependency is given that in the column department one of the list of values. In this case, there is only one value in the list. It is marketing. Select click-through rate. This is one of 6 KPI that are measured from 0 to 100. Let's check it out. As you can see, everything is correct. This dependence on 6 values is also shown below. Let's enter a value and move to the date column. The limit that the date must be no earlier than January 1st, 2023 also works. Let's enter the date. Now all the cells are without errors and we can save this row. For examples, I will add a couple more rows of data for other departments in an accelerated mode. You can also import data from popular spreadsheet formats. It is important to specify the correct column names in the file because values will be searched by these names. If a column is not found, it will contain empty values. As you can see, after importing the data from the file, several errors were detected. Let's fix them. So, we've fixed all the errors and can save the data. Now let's see how our template looks to the moderator. Now we've gone into our template as the moderator that we specified earlier. A moderator cannot edit template settings. They can only add or remove access for users. As I said earlier, the moderator always sees all the collected data and can edit or add to it if the data collection is running. Let's import some new rows for the moderator as well. So the data is without errors, so let's save it. And let's use one more access setting. This is the users with access column. Since in the template settings we didn't give users access to all data, from the user side there will be an empty table. Let's add the user access to one of the already collected rows. Now let's look at the template as a user. As you can see, the user now has only one visible row, which we gave him access to via the Access Settings column. Also, the user cannot see some of the template settings that are related to user access, but at the same time, they can see all the settings and limits of the columns, but can't change them. Now let's add some rows for the user too. We will also import them from the file. The application showed us an error in the row. Let's fix it and save the data. Now back to the administrator. Here you can see all the rows we have saved. The last 4 rows show that the user has access to them because the moderator gave him access to one of them, and the other 3 rows were added by the user himself. At any time, you can download the collected data to a file using the button above. When saving, you can also add data from the archive, that is, deleted or modified rows. And also, if you are an administrator or moderator, you can add information from the users with access column. Finally, when you have collected all the data you need, you can stop data collection. After that, moderators and users will no longer be able to add new data, but will still be able to see and download it. And you, as an administrator, will again be able to change the data collection mode and customize the columns and their limits. So in this video guide, we demonstrated the general functionality of Tabliner and created a template for collecting KPI from different departments of the company. For more information about Tabliner's features or how any settings work, you can read the documentation on our website or you can contact us. Thank you for watching and see you next time.